Specific actions was the charge that I was given here. And not to, oh, by the way, can this light go? Oh, yeah. This is the famous hockey stick graph from IPCC, last 1,000 years, temperature. This is the 20th century, different projections, and indeed, as was noted this morning, we're actually even above the path of the most extreme projection. And further rapid warming is projected. We're already seeing effects, ecological effects, some big disturbance processes, including here in Andalusia. These are all things I've seen, taken pictures of, in terms of low reservoirs, fire in the Sierra Nevada, erosion associated with that, mortalidad, dieback of trees. So there's things happening out there. In the meantime, we've had these climate summits have been occurring through time, 14 of them, it seems. And the ice packs are getting smaller each time. But not so much action is being taken, but a lot of blaming about who's responsible. Although we know in the U.S. we are the worst culprits, have been, for sure. So, as Jill mentioned earlier, well, no action in the face of this climate change may be the most risky thing we can do. But what actions should we take? Do we really have good science-based practical actions for managing ecosystems to adapt to climate change? Or is it kind of, no matter what you do, a bad outcome, likely, or we don't know? Well, in the United States in recent years, despite the previous administration officially not believing too much in climate change, they did agree that we could study it. And so in recent years, Jill mentioned this, there's been the scientific basis for developing adaptation options, which developed these synthesis and assessment products, SAPs, a number of them. One particular product was 4.4, which was this, adaptation options for climate-sensitive ecosystems and resources, which included a variety of lands, okay? National forests, national parks, national wildlife refuges, wild and scenic rivers. These are all big categories of land, mostly public land in the U.S. This is just a look at this is the 900-page volume Jill mentioned to you. It has different chapters covering those different things. National forests, here's the national parks one, which you'll see the lead author was Jill, worked on this one. I'm going to speak more, I'll focus on some work from some Forest Service colleagues who also have been in the forefront of pushing this communication between the scientific community and the land managers, because there's a very large area of national forests in the United States with land managers who've needed some help from the science community. So this is some findings from the, if I go back, yeah. So these authors, you'll see I'll go through several different kinds of presentations or reports from a number of different, mostly Forest Service colleagues for a little bit. So here's a synthesis of some of their overall findings adaptation options for managing for resilience. We'll see these R words, a lot of ERE words they seem to like, but to protect, reduce, represent, replicate, etc., with examples, and I will cover some of these. A number of these are things that you've seen generally for. A couple of key messages that I'll emphasize that come up again and again in these reports, no matter who's looking at them. And one of them is that it's very important to cooperate across ownership jurisdictions, because the biological diversity, the ecological processes, the ecological services that we care about don't care about land management boundaries and the scale at which, as Jill said, the issue needs to define the scale at which we address these things. Whereas traditionally, people are all looking inside at their own place and their own land management agency. One of the real leaders in this is a woman named Connie Millar, works for Forest Service Research. Summarizing a few things from a presentation that Connie shared, is this thing you heard Jill mention, this idea of a toolbox of options. The Forest Service has been working very hard to provide what they are calling a toolbox and to make that accessible to the land managers. We'll look at 4 particular adaptation strategies that they're emphasizing. in that resistance, resilience, response, and realignment. So first of those, resistance, the idea being, as the word says, basically to try to hold on to an ecosystem in the form that it is now, more or less. An example they show here, there's these huge bark beetle outbreaks and mortality in the northwestern, western United States of a bark beetle that could cross right here to a very closely related pine species that it's not been in for thousands of years at the least. But it seems with warmer temperatures is allowing it to cross this gap. So there's much effort in Canada right now trying to stop that, to resist this change that's being driven by climate change, because there's an unknown risk that it could affect huge areas to the east. This approach of resistance can be good, but it's quite likely for many things it's only possible in the short term. So we have to be careful of wasting too much energy trying to swim against the stream, because of the climate change is changing and apparently is going to continue to change. An important one is promoting resilience to change, basically improving the capacity of ecosystems to recover in the face of some disturbance processes that are being accelerated or amplified by climate change. Minimizing the stress. Some management examples are thinning forest stands. We heard about that actually this morning from Paco. Prescribed fires, seed banks, making snow at ski areas, working with rare species populations to build their populations up before things get too bad. A third response emphasis there is facilitating the ability of ecosystems to respond to change, to more or less evolve on their own in response. Things like, and this could include things like thinking ahead to say, okay, if it's getting warmer, an obvious example many people have thought about is changing the genetics or even changing the species of trees that we may plant in forestry operations to reflect what will be there 50 years from now rather than what may be there exactly now. And in some cases, basically, we have to change our thinking and realign how we manage to the current and projected dynamics. The example they give here is a lake called Mona Lake, and this is the elevation of that lake through time. The city of Los Angeles began diverting water here and caused this lake level to drop by 30, 40 meters. So it changed the ecology, the hydrology of this lake. They cannot change that totally. They've allowed some water back in, but they cannot completely restore that. So this is a new reality. It's one that as managers we should work with. We have to accept some things. Thinking about this dialogue between science, researchers, and management, there's different ways to respond as managers. I mean, we can just say, well, there's so much uncertainty, we're not even going to plan, we're just going to just let it go. The next thing that follows from that is, well, but when something happens that affects a resource we care about, well, we will react to it, but we're not going to plan ahead. Versus where we've been trying, of course, to get people to think, and indeed the purpose of a meeting like this, a workshop like this, is to be proactive, to plan in advance, to use our best information now to think about what can we do. Again, this toolbox approach, sort of general philosophy, there's not going to be a single solution for every case. Many kinds of different options, short-term and long-term. We need to be mixing and matching these tools. And again, this adaptive management paradigm that you heard described before. Being flexible, experimental, learning, thinking outside the box, that kind of thought. Another Forest Service colleague, Dave Peterson, again working very closely with land managers. He's a researcher, Forest Service research. From a recent presentation he gave, some general adaptation strategies. We've seen these, adaptive management, dealing with uncertainty. I wanted to emphasize this idea that ecological disturbance is something I work on a lot, and we tend to think of it as a bad thing. Okay? But another way to think of it, it is an opportunity. These ecosystems are reorganizing themselves. They have to reorganize themselves if the climate changes so much. Okay? So it's an opportunity to try to work with those ecological processes and to help these ecosystems basically realign themselves with the new reality that they have to work with. And then this last one, again, another point that I've emphasized before, I'll emphasize it again, the importance of working with your neighbors, of collaborating across boundaries. So a number of strategies, specific strategies Dave went through. Increase landscape diversity. We've heard these things touched on briefly. Increase resilience at large spatial scales. So we're looking at the scale of landscapes. Almost every assessment that people have done says this is the scale where many things have to happen at landscape scale, at watershed scale, regional scale in some cases. So increasing the size of management units, thinking about the patterns and processes at that scale, the connectivities, the fragmentation. A second strategy, different things to work on biological diversity. These are all things we all pretty much know, and people have thought about these, but there's a category. Again, that focus on disturbances. It seems that many kinds of disturbance processes that have been important are becoming even more important, so we should be planning for this. Things like in the Western North America, fire is naturally an important part of almost all these ecosystems. We should be planning for it and treating it that way and recognizing it's even going to increase and incorporating that in our management policies and plans even more fundamentally than we have so far. Another thing that we can do is reduce those non-climatic sources of stress. There's many, many other stressors out there that come from our past and present management actions, things like exotic species, air pollution, all these kinds of things. Those are other things we can do to reduce the stress on ecosystems. Yeah, don't swim upstream. Manage for realistic outcomes. And this gets to something we heard discussed as well this morning from Jordi about thresholds, the importance of trying to identify where we can, where these non-linearities are in the systems, where if things get to that point, it's over. The system is going to change markedly. Determine which thresholds can be exceeded. There's a lot of this going on in the Western North America right now with fish, cold water fish. Fish that can only survive and carry out their life cycle in water that's cold enough. And it's in some places, in 50 years, that can probably be maintained. Others, maybe not. So there's places maybe we should not spend the energy and focus it where it can be possible. And this is sort of the idea of triaging. And basically, we're going to have to make choices. We're going to have to abandon some things we care about because they are not going to be able to persist. When something, either a disturbance or a management action happens and we're trying to restore ecosystem processes or patterns on the landscape, for some time, and I've actually been part of the sort of the work that supported this, the idea of using historical conditions as a template to drive your targets. Well, we're going into a no analog future. The past is increasingly not going to be a guide to what we're going to see in the future. And we're going to need to accept that. Doesn't mean we throw it away yet. I mean, the history still, there's a lot of inertia in these systems. There's still things we can certainly learn from the history. But we have to be careful with that. And a good example of that is trying to maintain the exact same vegetation types that have been there for the last hundreds of years. These plant associations are a particular way of thinking about that on landscapes in the western U.S. that foresters were trained in. They're going to have to change how they think about those things. This kind of goes with that idea. Advice from the great one. Probably not so many people follow hockey here, but Wayne Gretzky was the greatest hockey scorer of all time. Not a big person, very, very smart player, and indeed, he scored so many goals because he skated to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been, right? Thinking ahead, moving. However, perhaps you can relate the concept better for football. So, and I'm told from Inigo that this is the man, this is the guy in España today. So he did not actually say this, I don't think, but I modified the quote too. He could have said it, though. I'm sure he thinks that way. So, a seventh adaptation strategy. We should anticipate big surprises, as we heard from a number of speakers earlier today. There are these non-linearities, these thresholds, these umbrales in the system. We know that this is embedded in physical and biological systems. We don't know where they all are. And but we should be expecting that these things are going to occur, and we should have some kind of contingency plans at least for dealing with them. A close colleague of Jill and I, Nate Stevenson, who works at Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park, put these slides together for some talks he does working with managers, thinking about this idea about nonlinearities and thresholds. So this is how we tend to think about the world, is that climate and time, climate has changed, it's always changed through time, and So there's some gradual change in climate. Well, of course, the ecosystem is going to track that in a gradual way. And related to that, you can imagine that, well, if there's an abrupt change in climate for some reason, well, then the ecosystem is going to be forced to respond more abruptly as well. What we're not ready for is the idea that gradual changes in climate, like these kind of projections that we all see, right? These nice things, it's going to continue to get warmer or whatever, can lead to these abrupt transitions in an ecosystem, abrupt reorganizations, okay? We see examples of these things happening already. All right, we heard a whole talk on it this morning from alpine lake systems, but we don't know where most of these are. But we know enough to be a little bit nervous that they're out there. So in a general sense, this is still from Dave Peterson, some key lessons learned, keys for success from his experiences working with Forest Service land managers. That this is an important thing, that the managers themselves, yes, science, there needs to be this partnership, and scientists are providing some information, but in terms of the good ideas for what to do on the ground, land management, the land managers are indeed the experts, and they're going to produce most of the options for this. Importance of strong science collaboration, I think I highlighted one more, yes. And this kind of ties back to what Inigo was just covering, the scientific documentation. If we're going to do adaptive management, if we're going to learn, learning is such an important thing. We're going to have to learn, all of us. From a scientific standpoint, we need to be documenting that, which includes keeping track of the information, the data. Just another example, briefly, involving multiple land managers. There's this area called the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. This is Yellowstone National Park. Most of this land around it is National Forest Service land. It's an example, kind of another way. It's sort of a scenario-based model, similar to the thing Joe was talking about, but a little bit different. Selecting a target. Oops, let's go back. Basically, the targeted management objective, they're looking at the Yellowstone River. They want to maintain the flows to maintain what? This target species, Yellowstone cutthroat trout, one of those trout species that needs water cool enough. Okay, so you build this conceptual model, you bring a group of people together, scientists and managers together in a group like this. They can build a conceptual model thinking about Yellowstone River flows. We care about the quantity, the quality, the timing, and there's all these many things that affect it, right? Driving, including climate is one of these things. All right, well, this is going to change. If we change the climate, okay, the climate changes to warmer, drier, all right, then you still have all these things going on here that, and what would the change in climate do? You can think that it would have, positive and negative feedbacks to all these different parts of the system. Then if you think about where can you intervene, well, these are all places, they pick them on purpose, right, in their model, where management could do something. Okay, sometimes it's just a little something, sometimes it's a lot. But cumulatively, maybe each one of those things is not so much, but cumulatively, you can start with those intervention points and start thinking about all these different actions you could do. Oops, sorry. That give you some options for doing some small things. Now, at least for some period of time, that might be enough for keeping cutthroat trout in Yellowstone. It's a really important fish in that ecosystem for a lot of things. Again, another one of the key lessons from these Forest Service efforts, they're not just Forest Service. For instance, here in the extreme northwest of Washington State, right, so this is the northwest corner of the continental U.S., the Olympic Peninsula. The heart of the peninsula is a big national park, Olympic National Park, surrounded by Forest Service land, state land, Native American reservations, and all these people have been brought together in an interagency collaboration to assess the vulnerability and what are the adaptation options for that part of the world. Scientists increasingly work this way too, this idea of collaborating together. It's not so much single investigator-driven science anymore. A lot of what we do is done in larger and larger groups. Jill and I, for the last quite some number of years, have been working. Some of our main funding has come from a climate change source in USGS. And the last, I guess 6 years ago, we formally banded together in this Western Mountain Initiative as a single proposal with investigators from these places. Actually, these folks up here are Forest Service researchers, but it's USGS funding. but collaborative research, multiple agencies, many university collaborators supporting graduate students, collaborators, and indeed, an international component. It's what has supported my ability actually to be able to interact here the last number of years. I mean, working both ways. So yes, I have a little, with just my node. That's just my little piece of the thing. So yes, so this is where I am down here, this mountain range at the south end of the Rocky Mountains. So a couple of examples from mi paisaje, aquí, in the Sierra Gemas in Nuevo Mexico. There's a little national park in the southeast flank of this. It's a big old volcano that you can see. For those of you who know, the city of Santa Fe is here, and Albuquerque is about there in that part of the world. This is that landscape. Complicated land ownership. This is actually a simplified version of the land ownership map, but you have the national park, Los Alamos National Laboratory, national forest land, a national preserve, which is a unique category of land management, and Native American land all over that you're just outside the field of view. Some you can see. And all these kinds of climate change-induced processes are actually starting to show up quite strongly in our landscape. You know, we have fires and climate-induced dieback from drought and erosion associated with these things. And those processes and other things don't care about whether it's Forest Service or Park Service or Native American land or Los Alamos Laboratory. Drought, we had a very severe drought in much of the 2000s, of course, affects large areas and caused significant mortality. This one species of tree, one of many species of tree that had significant dieback, but Pinus edulis, more than 1 million hectares died within a 2-year period in 2002, 2003. Literally going from needles, brown needles on the trees, red needles, to just the gray skeletons. Big, fast ecological change. There's a little salamander, a little plethodonid salamander. It breathes through its skin, no lungs, lives in the soil. It's very hard to study because it lives in the soil. The only place in the world it's found is in that mountain range. And it doesn't know about our land ownership boundaries. It doesn't know nor care. Its life is in a small space. But if we want to keep that organism alive, this animal is probably highly at risk from climate change. It needs cool, wet forests at the high elevation. Ciervo, elk. Jill showed some slides before. They're actually a bit of a problem because we don't have wolves in part of the landscape, the important predator. So these are radiotelemetry locations from 2 different years. The elk go wherever they want. Okay, the only thing they respect is where they're hunted, so they pay attention to that. But in terms of ecological pressures, they move where they will. And fire, this is the east side of the Gemas. These are all the fires just in the last, these big ones in the last 30 years with different fire severities. It burned through the heart of the forest zone on the east flank in 30 years. High severity fires over large areas. A lot of these areas are actually converting to non-forest. They're going to shrubland. That's the process. Shrubs, the future. Sprouting shrubs. Not just in the Mediterranean, in the southwest U.S. as well. And associated with fire, as here, you get all kinds of runoff and erosion processes. For about 2 years, you get about, indeed, 100-fold increases in runoff and erosion until you get some sort of cover growing back on these sites. Drought can also reduce the herbaceous cover in the drier parts of the landscape, and so there's quite a bit of desertification in the lower woodland and grassland zones in this part of the world. So again, very closely climate related, and it's a threshold phenomenon associated with the patterning, the amount and the patterning of ground cover. And one of the big uncertainties scientific out there is the interactions between these different disturbance processes. You've got climate driving, but then you've got these things that are affecting each other. So when you give a talk like this, and I didn't really talk very much about these disturbances, but a talk like Paco gave earlier today, it can be depressing, right? You know, oh my, is this the future of the Gemas Mountains? The trees are going to die, they're going to burn, it's going to erode. You know, we have smoke in the air. We're thinking, is this the future of our mountain range that people care about? And so there's sometimes this gloomy kind of feeling about this, right? That this is the future. Climate change is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, you know, with these kinds of bad processes, and this is where we're headed. And there's nothing we can really do. And what that often leads to is something like this cartoon. right? Which is, this is a weatherman on the television giving the forecast for the weekend. Our extended forecast includes global warming and the catastrophic end of the human race. Que lastima. But for the weekend, it looks like sunny skies, mild temperatures, and a general apathy toward environmental concerns. Back to you in the news. So we have to be careful as we present these things that we don't depress people and that we don't depress ourselves, okay? Because in reality, even though there's problems, there's uncertainties, there are things we can do. And that's, we were talking about a number of those. A couple very quickly, just specific examples from that landscape. Part of the fire problem is climate-driven, the increase in fire. Part of it is also because of a change in the forest structure. In part because we kept fire out of our systems. We know a lot about the history of fire and how closely fire was linked for at least thousands of years in this landscape. This is something that you can do something directly about. Foresters are good at this. You can thin the forest. You can use prescribed fire in ways. And there's a lot of work that's done doing this in this part of the world. And we have evidence. This was 200,000 hectare fire in, I believe, 2003 or 2002, I don't remember, in northern Arizona. Huge, the Rodeo Chedeschi fire. These areas circled where you see, this is false color, right? So the red, the forest was killed. Pine forest, think Pinus ponderosa is what most of this forest was, very dense. But these areas where you see these green islands are places where there had been prescribed fire and thinning ahead of time in the 10 years before the fire. In those places, the fire went to the ground and the forest survived. So we have some very good evidence that it can work. What result of that is that people are now planning, this is the Jemez Mountains again with some of the main land ownership boundaries in white, but these colored patterns are projects that people are planning. This is several years old. There's actually a project being planned right now that covers 25% of the mountain range, multiple agencies being planned to treat the fuels. Okay? So there's a lot of this work is starting to be going on across the western United States. These also have some other kinds of benefits that you can think of from a climate change standpoint. We see this in the park I work in, actually, that, again, in the lower elevations of the park, we have a big problem with desertification and soil erosion because of a history of livestock grazing and, well, it went to cross the threshold and it doesn't seem to recover on its own. A management intervention is to thin some of the woody plants, distribute the branches on the ground, changes the microenvironment and the cover at the soil surface, and the runoff and erosion basically stops, the plant available water increases, and you get places that look like that, looking like that in just 2 years. But we presented this as a restoration project. It took 10 years to get this through the compliance and the Park Service. But we can now present this, I present it anyway. Arguably, you would do this from a climate change adaptation perspective to increase the resilience of this system. It's both more resilient to mortality from drought and to high severity fire. And the soil resource is being protected through natural processes. One thing about fire, I just want to say, sometimes no action in a general sense in the face of climate change is a big risk, okay? But sometimes there are things that we can let go. We don't have to manage everything. One example is that when we had these millions of hectares in the early 2000s dying, and continuing to die in some places in western North America from drought, okay, and heat, like this. This is a tree, Pinus ponderosa, in Bandelier that died from drought in 2002. The needles fall off, it looks like this. This is a ponderosa pine tree in Bandelier that died in a crown fire. Fire burned through the canopy. Fuego de copa. Okay? They look the same. A crown fire, the fuegos de copa, are burning in the fine fuels in the canopy explosively. They are not consuming the wood. Okay? Therefore, the initial reaction when people see brown needles on these trees is, the whole world is going to burn now because we have nothing but fuel. But in reality, that this is a timeline where you have starting with a live forest and then dieback occurs here. And then the needles fall off the tree here, and then eventually the trees start to fall to the ground. This is the risk, the hazard of canopy fire and surface fire. Very different things. Okay? Fire risk is not just one thing. So, yes, I assert very few data on this, by the way. Good topic for people who want to do some work on this. We need data. Be different in many different ecosystems. I don't say it's the same here, okay, where you have all these oaks and broadleaf plants in the understory. But when the needles fall off, the canopy fire risk goes to almost nothing. But the surface fire risk is going up because the amount of surface fuels are increasing for many reasons. Point is, what we care about, the fires we cannot suppress, the dangerous fires, are these ones. So actually, forest dieback, at least of needle leaf conifer trees, is not increasing the fire risk, at least once the needles fall off in just a year or two. So we can actually, again, view disturbance not just as a bad thing. Yeah, there's some bad things maybe from all this forest mortality, but there's actually some good things, and we can kind of use this from a management standpoint. In the suroeste de los Estados Unidos, in my part of the world, there are many mountains with steep slopes with forests that are impossible for foresters to manage mechanically. The only thing we could do is put fire, prescribed fire on, but they're too dangerous when the forest is thick. The fire could escape. But once dieback, mortality, causes the forest to thin, we could actually burn safely in these things. Carefully still, but much more safely. It's an opportunity. It's not just a bad thing. Similarly, an example I want to highlight here, last example actually, before finishing, is here in the Sierra Nevada. This is actually the project that actually I started working with folks here on. In 2005, September, there was a good-sized fire for you, a big fire in your park. And working cooperatively with many different folks here, particularly Javier and the folks at the National Park, and at the University of Granada, Jorge Castro and Regino, secured some funding, set up some experimental plots and worked with the foresters to actually implement it. The foresters were very good. We had a nice field tour, discussed the possibilities. And so we set up these different kinds of treatments, because sort of a traditional approach here would be you have a big fire that kills the trees, you salvage log it. You cut the trees, you remove the biomass, you chip it, or you pull it out. So we tested that approach versus approach sort of like the restoration treatment I know, where you cut some of the trees but you leave the branches, partial cut, and some that you actually leave everything. And so this work is still early, but there are a couple manuscripts moving through. This is a look at some of the treatments, different things. The initial results show that, for example, for Pinus pinaster, the best regeneration is occurring in the partial cut, where you leave the branches. Microenvironment seems better at the soil surface. And also biodiversity, things like herbaceous plants and birds, is better in either the partial cut or the non-intervention, the control. Removing all that biomass, all that structure, has some negative effects. So, in conclusion, who's going to fix this problem? We have climate change. Who's going to fix this? Oh, no. It's got to be us. It's supposed to go like... Sorry. Well, this slide doesn't want to behave. Anyway, it's us, okay? We're the ones, people like us. This is our job, okay? And this is why we're here this week. Somehow it skipped, I'm sorry. At the end, I didn't want to miss, that's why, because the slide was out of sequence. I'm sorry, so my mistake. Anyway, there are some important websites, 2 really good ones. Canada has been on top of this for a while. And Natural Resources Canada has a very nice website with some resources on adaptation, climate change adaptation for land managers, specifically good interaction with scientists. So I encourage you to look at this one. And then there's the one the Forest Service has put up that a number of the researchers I was talking about there have put a lot of energy into it, are going to continue to do that. And increasingly, Jill has a project, part of our project actually, to contribute from like the national parks and other public lands. This may become kind of like the place for public lands in the U.S. to get those resources. The toolkit. You can find the Forest Service toolkit there. This is what that website looks like if you go to it, right? Information and tools for land managers. This is the entry point to it. There was the slide that was out of sequence. Sorry. And that's why I was confused. And anyway, here's the closing slide. So just the point, again, that these landscapes, we need to think at a landscape scale. We need to work together. In our particular landscapes, yes, we got to think about the whole planet, climate change. It's a global phenomenon. But as we zoom in to our home landscapes, these are the places we care about most. This is the best place to reach students. This is the best place for us to work together and try to achieve real things we can see on the ground. And I'm glad to help a little bit here. So, thank you.